Was Jesus the victim of a conspiracy? So here we can say that at the level of the plot to kill him, we have a typical example, but whether this is a conspiracy theory or not remains to be seen. We must first distinguish the difference between a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory. A conspiracy theory is a vast conspiracy that sometimes takes centuries, that is prepared by intelligent people who would master everything and who, at some point, finally would pursue their goal. For example, within the conspiracy theory that is currently developed, the World Trade Center and its explosion in 2001 may have been prepared in 1905, since the means of the €5 note, when folded in a certain way, it represents the World Trade Center and an arriving plane. So, in sum, the high level Illuminati plotters, Freemasons, planned down to the last detail the future of humanity in order to develop something that could be, for example, the domination of the Jewish people. There are all kinds of ideas that people invent in this conspiracy theory. In the Jesus case, we observe that a quantity of people cooperated in the end to have him put to death. Jesus, in what he had experienced, is the typical example that conspiracy theories do not exist. First reason, no one could foresee the coming of such UFO, an absolutely unidentified flying object. Someone who claims to be God would preach the love of God pushed to death nobody. And so all human beings are surprised. And we see that depending upon the circumstances, when Jesus had started preaching and during 3 years, there are several kinds of enemies who had arisen up against him. There had been some determined enemies, it is true, who decided that Jesus had been ruining their own power, which had been anchored in the Jewish faith. So they want to put him to death and push things to the limit, observing the resurrection of Lazarus until they decided to kill Lazarus also, because it cannot be true. Or if it is true, they will also have to fight against him. Among these very determined people, we could mention a few Jewish high priests, perhaps 10, but apart from those in the circle, a little wider, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, some Levites, the theologians who hated Jesus and did not cease in setting snares for him, even on occasions attempting to stone him punctually, but for other reasons, because according to their rules, their little Sabbath law, Jesus flouted them, and at the same time he exposed their hypocritical behavior. Hypocritical Pharisees, so they hated Jesus, they felt humiliated, they wanted revenge. These Jewish authorities had been in anger. The other being theologians, they had thought through the issues more, but in the second circle, which there had been an anger and inseparable hatred from Jesus' person, derived from the message that he had been teaching. Then we go into the circle of a little further. When we look at Pontius Pilate and Herod, who by the way became friends that day after the death of Jesus because they had collaborated with this big problem of the Jewish shadly insurrection, and on the one hand, and then on the other, that Pilate, a cowardly upstart, he had not wanted a riot, and at the same time he had attempted to do everything in order to save Jesus by all reasonable means, but he had been unable to do so, and he finally ended up by washing his hands of the affair. As for Herod, he enjoyed all this, he sought for play everywhere. He had been a degenerate and immoral person. These two are miles away from some kind of Jewish priest conspiracy, who have had a deep and theological reason, and they collaborated by chance. The day before, if they would have been told that, they will never have believed it. But it happened during that morning, like so. Then there had been the people more distant. Very often there had been, first of all, the high priest's customers, that is to say, those who had debts to the high priest. They start shooting to death simply because the high priest had given them money in one form or another. And then there had been those who are conformists. Since everyone shouts to death, let us cry to death. And Jesus prayed for them, saying, Father, forgive them because they do not know what they are doing. Then there had been the friends, the close friends of Jesus. Most of them had fled, and that's what you see when someone is in trouble. Their colleagues or friends no longer visible to him. It had been not because they were angry with him. Sometimes they really felt sorry for him, but they had given up on Jesus because their own circumstance had been jeopardized. In the case of the apostles, it had been that their own life that was in danger, and as Jesus had earlier told them to put away the sword, they had run away. In the end, a very small circle of friends remained with Jesus that he could count upon, counted on the fingers of one hand. Some women, is Apostle John, and people we would not suspect, such as, for example, Joseph d'Arimathie, people that he maybe didn't know well. He had not been that close to them. There had been Nicodemus also. In most human conspiracies, the trend remains the same. There had been no conspiracy theory with great organizers who will have mastered everything for centuries. If this is not a person, then it may only be one identity who is capable of this. It is not a human being. The Greeks called them or them the immortals. We in Catholic theology call them demons, rebellious angels. They are not mortal, and therefore they may predict for centuries the destruction of man. Them, okay, they are kind of a conspiracy theory, but the human beings are passengers and pass by so quickly they often do not see further than their generation. Human beings are like tokens, disposable pawns viewed by demons and the devil over the generations. He uses one or another sins which arrive for opposing sides, which are variable and with pendulum effects of psychology upon the crowds. We may start from Nazism to French student revolt in May 68, and that's how it happens. Therefore, no one is unaccomplished. However, Satan uses everything and anything for his own goal. That therefore is the Satan conspiracy theory, in order distant man from humility and of love, and force man to choose at the hour of death to revolt against the God of humility and love. Only we must be careful. This perspective of the existence of the rebellious angel is theology and therefore elaborated in politics. A conspiracy theory using theology, it is extremely dangerous because this cause it is hidden. It is related to faith. In philosophy, experience illustrates conspiracies with cowardice, as I have indicated. Some organizers and occasional conspiracies disappear along with their purpose with the death of their authors.